stage, but the last stage just before we were talking about just you had got a job with PA to go to Australia. Is that right? And,
That's right.
And
Sorry, excuse me. I was going to say, can you sit just a little bit this way?
that
No,
one?
not writing. You can still look at me, but come over nearer the bed,
Okay, sure.
and now straighten up.
Okay. Is that right?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, that's
Here
all
we are, probably on camera while I carry on. Yes, that's right. We'd been married. We'd been married in the August the year before, and here it was September, as I recall, of the following year. Mum hadn't long been out of hospital with a kidney operation, but I got offered this job in Australia, and I said, well, it's quite a lot to ask to up sticks and head off to Australia, to a new job, to country neither of us have lived in, and you're only just getting back your health. And she said, "Oh, let's go. Let's make a new start." So we did. I carried on with Downers until the end of that year. So I'd had just the 1 year with Downers, and left them, as I said before, because I felt that they had so much talent in house that I couldn't see how I was going to be a significant player in that business. And I went with we went off to Sydney. I think we went off on in July. Sorry, in end of January. I think we arrived on Australia Day, 1965. And we had the firm's office was in North Sydney. We stayed for a few weeks in a one-bedroom flat in Mosman, and a nice flat it was, but it wasn't so good for us with even though we only had one baby, Lindley, aged one and a bit, and we then got a house over in Turramurra. In the meantime, I was doing some work at Enfield and what PA management called training, and it was too. It was in the factory, which made a lot of plastic articles, and I found I didn't really like the factory atmosphere compared with the civil engineering and construction atmosphere. I mean, there's still good people doing a very worthwhile job, but I found I didn't particularly care for the factory atmosphere. But anyway, I spent about 10 or 12 weeks there, and then in May that year, May 65, I was transferred. We all went off to Mount Gambier, which is at the southern tip of South Australia.
That's right.
And that was a town of, say, about 20,000 people, and it was the work I was involved in centred around a large area of pinus radiata forest, just the same way as around Rotorua in New Zealand is radiata forest, sorry. And I guess it was one area, one of the few areas where the industry pertaining to radiata pine was bigger in New Zealand than it was in Australia. Not that I knew anything much about the radiata forest industry in New Zealand, but it was one of the few times where people knew about New Zealand, and in fact some of the people there used to go to New Zealand to learn a bit more about radiata pine forestry. So I worked in a sawmill there for 6 months, setting up they had new equipment, setting up a productivity incentive scheme, so they got productivity and quality productivity, and we lived in a funny old house in Mount Gambier. We found that in fact 50% of the people, much more than 50% of the people, this is back in 1965, in fact cooked on wood stoves and heated their water for their hot water with on the hot back of the wood stove.
Okay.
So we got there and suddenly realised that this house had electric stove that looked like it had just been installed. We didn't realise there was no hot water system, so we made a bit of a fuss and got one. But however, that's not what we want to remember Mount Gambier by. But I was fairly busy, and Mum was found it a little fairly lonely, I think. And but we got through the 6 months there, and the end of the time and the end of the December, we headed off and had a 2 or 3 week holiday at Victor Harbour, which is a seaside resort on the coast south of Adelaide. And so we did that, and then we headed off to Melbourne.
Did you have the E.H. Holden at that stage?
Ah yes, we'd bought the E.H. Holden when we got to Sydney, and it was a near new 11,000 miles on the clock. And yes, we had the old Holden with Lindley sleeping in the pram top in the back, and we then went on. I was then sent to Melbourne for a couple of months, where we lived in a flat in Middle Brighton, while I worked once again at a factory, which was a Guest Key Nettlefolds. I don't know who they are now, GKN, who were at that time a very large UK company, making things like nuts and washers, nuts and bolts and screws and one thing and another. And whereas I'd been working on these incentive schemes and production control schemes in the forest, here I was doing some work learning how to put in a training scheme for operators. And that was only a couple of months, and Mum was fairly pregnant by then with you, Matthew, and we made a special request that we'd like to be somewhere settled, preferably Sydney. By the time Mum was 7 months pregnant, and they were pretty good. They arranged that. We got to Sydney, and we got a house in Fairlight, and that would be in about. I guess it must have been March of that year, March '66, was it? Is that right?
I was born in May '66.
Yeah, right, March '66. And then this place in Fairlight, and I was then sent to a job in a company down at Padstow that made elevators for large buildings. In fact, it was a Civil and Civic wholly owned subsidiary making elevators, and their name was Elevators Limited. And they had very depressing lot of old buildings making elevators. And I found this once again, I was in this factory environment. I didn't enjoy it much, but I knew I had to stick it out for, I sort of reckoned, at least 2 years, and while I learnt something and got an okay thing on my CV. I spent a few months there. Of course, during that time you were born at the Royal North Shore Hospital.
That's right.
And Lindley went to kindergarten, and just handy there in Fairlight. I worked there for about 4 months, I think, in Padstow, and then I went to another place in Alexandria, which is quite near Padstow, and it was at that time Australia were changing from imperial currency of pounds, shillings and pence to dollars and cents, and all the petrol pumps in Australia had to be altered. So when they rang up pounds, shillings and pence, they now rang up dollars and cents. And there were, I don't know, 14 or 15 different types of pump, and these had to be changed all over the country fairly promptly. And my job was to set up a training scheme to teach a number of instructors from the various states who would then go out back to their states and train up teams of let's say, a couple of dozen blokes who would go out in pairs and in panel vans and go around the state changing the petrol pumps. So that was fairly straightforward sort of training thing, which I did. Once again, I didn't enjoy the factory environment, but it was it was reasonably successful. Has been the forestry one. The elevator one was fairly unsuccessful. It didn't go very well at all. And I carried on in that job through, I think, till about the November, and then we would have normally. They then said, "Well, you've had 2 years in Australia. We want you to go back to New Zealand," and so we would have all normally gone back. But Lindley had trouble with one eye. One eye didn't coordinate with the other, so that she'd be looking at one eye would be looking straight ahead, and the other with a slight turn in it. And we were put onto a very good doctor in Sydney, who had to do, I think, 2 or maybe 3 eye operations. PA were very good. They said, "Oh well, Judy and the family can stay back in Fairlight, and I can go on to work in New Zealand," which I did. And so Lindley's eyes have been pretty good ever since, thanks to this doctor, who was a most unprepossessing sort of fellow, but nevertheless he did a great job. Over in King's Cross, there was the Roman Catholic hospital there, I think.
Oh yeah. The Mater, not the Mater, the another one you're talking about.
Now, I think it's a much more high-powered one now, in terms of building and so on. So,
what was your favourite spot in Australia in terms of those places you lived? Sounds like it wasn't Mount Gambier.
No. Well, we enjoyed being in Sydney, and we enjoyed very much being in Fairlight because it had this beautiful view over the harbour, and it was a house and 3 bedrooms, and so by this time we had Lindley, who was getting on for 2, and yourself as a baby, and so you're pretty restricted in what you can do, but we'd all get in the car and in 5 minutes be it Pebble Beach or perhaps Manly Beach or 40 Baskets Beach or somewhere, and sit there perhaps for an hour, and then of course you'd usually have to head home with a couple of kids, but there was somewhere you go to quickly. We did enjoy it in the house we lived in Turramurra, and we thought it was very good. It was a nice urban area and the people were very friendly, and it was lovely trees and one thing and another, and we liked that very much. But the thing about Fairlight was that it was close enough to the sea that you didn't need, insects weren't a problem, so you didn't need screens, and the heat in the summer was not.
It's in Fairlight, yeah?
In Fairlight.
Yeah.
As compared with Turramurra.
Right.
But one thing we did learn, which come up later, is how important it is if you've got kids. I know you and I have talked about this from time to time, to live in an area where there are other children, because in Mount Gambier there had been no contact from anybody, so Mum didn't get to know anybody, and we never got invited out by anybody we worked for or anything. They were nice enough, whether they just felt reticent or for whatever reason. And in Melbourne we were on a fairly busy road, and the people round didn't have semi-detached houses, and they were okay for us, little 2-bedroom sort of semi-detached house, but there wasn't the sort of family community there was at a place like Turramurra. There wasn't quite the family community feeling either at Fairlight, although a couple of the neighbours we got to know quite well. They didn't have young families. So anyway, we'd had our 2 years in Sydney, or sorry, 2 years in Australia.
Okay, can you remember what I was? Have you got any memories of me in terms of what I was like as a baby?
Well, I think we've talked about this often.
Just for
You're a
the
very
camera.
good baby. None of you kids were breastfed. All of you were bottle fed because Mum had problems with Linley and with breast infections. And so you very quickly got into your routines, and you, by insisting on these routines, you slept you slept the designated 4 hours between feeds and the designated 8 hours between late feed and morning feed. And you were always, I think Mum said that she can remember one day when you had colic and you cried a fair bit of the day, but I mean that's indicative of the fact that by and large you were very good.
Stupid question. What's colic?
Oh, it's a bad stomach complaint. I guess I don't know. I can't give you the chemistry of it, or the bacteriology of it. But it's a very strong tummy pain, I think. And some babies have it a lot, and they cry a lot, and day after day, night after night. But you people were all very, by and large, all very contented and so on. I think it's fair to say, Linley, with all our moving around from age 1, it was a bit unsettling for her to have to keep changing houses. But you asked about yourself. You were a very happy, easy baby.
I think Mum used to say I used to eat a lot.
Oh well, you always used to drink up your bottle with gusto. You remember you lying on the floor on a pillow, holding the bottle in your hand and glugging it down. You could hear the milk hitting your tummy. So you did well.
Okay. And of those beaches you mentioned, which was the ones you tended to go to? Did you have one which you tended to go to more often?
Well, we only went there for a break. I don't know that we had many swims,
Right.
because you'd be quite busy. Sorry, you'd be quite busy looking after one of the.
Sorry, Pete. What I'll do is I'll just close this door here because I can see if you hear a few noises coming.
Yes, we didn't really have time to. We didn't have time to go surfing or anything like that. We would be maybe take Linley for a bit of a paddle, and you were hardly walking at this stage. So it was just a matter of getting out and feeling a bit of somewhere different rather than sitting in the house. I think, of course, one of the things is Manly Beach is great, but if you're in a car with a couple of young kids, one of whom will be in a cot at least, then you end up, you can't go far from the car. You've got to find somewhere to park it, and
Yes.
it's Sunday, so maybe it's hard to find a park, so probably we'd go to Pebbly Beach. Because
it's a harbour beach, is it somewhere?
well, Shelley Beach, is it? Or what's the one at the end of Manly?
Shelley
south.
Bay, yeah.
Shelley Bay.
Shelley Beach, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we probably go there as much as often as not. But just because there was a car park there and we could usually get a park, and there wasn't too much trouble in getting in and out and spending a little time, perhaps sitting down and have a cup of coffee, whatever. So there wasn't much beach going on. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Anyway, so you.
So we then went to the work I had. I worked for a battery company. That's a car battery. In those days, there were once again because of New Zealand's policies, almost all the cars were assembled in New Zealand. They had to send out the bits of the cars in crates, and then the New Zealand industry was encouraged to make as much as they could in the way of tyres, and in the case that I was involved in, batteries, whatever. And so a lot of the car assembly in those days, and they're mostly English cars, Ford and British Motors, were all in the Hutt Valley, in Holden, all in the Hutt Valley. And so this was a company, Exide it was called, that made the batteries. They sold batteries all around the country, but they had sold batteries to go in cars. That was a good base load for them. So I spent, I think it was sometime in December through till perhaps sometime in October, November, working at the Exide Battery Company. We lived at in Lower Hutt, in Bellevue Road. House is gone now, it's just right beside the Roman Catholic school. It's opposite the Hutt Park, Hutt Recreation Ground, and we lived there, and it was quite a nice little 3-bedroomed house. And once again, we found this situation where there were an older population there, not much in the way of young families. So it meant that Lindley, who by now was 4, she went to kindy, but there weren't many other girls with her. Sort of many other kids around the place who were younger kids. Lindley, by the way, went to kindy at, I think I mentioned that, at Fairline. And so we spent all that year living in Lower Hutt, and me working in Lower Hutt, and then at the end of the year, my time with PA management finished, and I was on a 3-year contract, and I don't talk about it too much, but they chose not to renew my contract. It suited me fine in a way, because I was actively wanting to get out of PA. I didn't like the working in the factory atmosphere, and Mum had said, or we both found the moving around all the time a bit of a pain, because you go and work in an outfit, because of the very nature of what you do, it's unlikely you'll be more than 6 months permanently in any one place. So if you're not in a very large city like Sydney or Melbourne, then there's a fair chance of you going out of the city or having to move around to part of the city that's a long way from where you're living. And you've got to be really on your mettle to go into a new organisation that's usually got a problem in some way. That's why you're going in there. You're being asked to do something they can't do themselves, or try and smarten themselves up, which they probably not too happy about. Some people might be happy with you coming in. So I decided anyway, but it was helped along by the fact they said, well, from the end of the year they wouldn't be renewing my contract. And so the upshot of that was that I looked around and decided we wanted to stay in Wellington if we could. And I didn't have a look at too many jobs. Weren't that many I could do. I could have gone back to the Ministry of Works. I talked to them. I could have gone back to Downer and Company, who I'd worked for a year, or I could have gone, if they'd have had me. There was a job going with a firm called Civil and Civic, who was the construction company of Jenny's firm, Lend Lease Corporation, who did the construction work. And in fact, I had a bit of a go at getting a job, and there was a lecturing in marketing at Victoria University. Suffice to say, they didn't show much interest in me. I nearly got the job with Civil and Civic, but I heard later through the grapevine that I was suggested I didn't have an eye for a bob, as they said, and an eye for a dollar. Maybe because the elevator firm that I'd worked for back in Sydney, in Padstow or Alexandria, one of those two. No, so when I said Padstow, that was wrong. It was Alexandria. Padstow is way over in the west. Yeah. Alexandria was where I worked with elevators, and then Gilbert Barker. Anyway, the elevator company was also a wholly owned subsidiary of Civil and Civic, of Lend-Lease. So I think the Civil and Civic might have heard that I didn't do too good a job at the elevators company, but I don't know that. I'm only guessing. Anyway,
sometimes in interviews it's just there's someone else who's better for the job.
Oh well, I knew the fellow I met. I'm not worried about this. The fellow the New Zealand manager, I got on very well with him, and he told me later he wanted to give me the job, but it had been vetoed by the managing director who had been over from Sydney and interviewed me also. So I'm delighted, in fact, because I was left with the opportunity of either returning to the Ministry of Works or returning to Downers. And so I went to work for Downers, and
So how did that come about? You just gave them a call and said, look, is there any jobs going? Or were they advertising? Or?
Well, I can't remember exactly. When I'd been over to New Zealand for Malcolm and Jill's wedding, this is some months before, I'd called in to see them to say hello, and I think I was probably fishing to see what jobs might be around too, basically to say hello. And at that stage they said, oh, if you like the job of like to come back and work for us, you can. We're just looking for a new chief engineer. And I said, well, I can't do a chief engineer's job. I said, oh, well, think about it. So anyway, then nothing came of that. And then I'm not sure whether I contacted Downers. I was certainly in my mind that I would, but I had a ring from Warren Bullock, who's a friend of mine now living in California, who was in Downers, and said there was a job going, was I interested, and from there. So I talked to them, and I was tossing that up at the time, and I was also tossing up whether to go to Civil and Civic. So so in the January, I went to Downer and Company. And Downer and Company, I think I mentioned before, were in several divisions. One was civil engineering. Sorry, one was earthworks, and the other was all civil engineering works, and the other was quarries. And I was in the civil engineering works working with Warren Bullock. And I was called assistant divisional manager, but there were only Warren, myself, and an engineer a bit younger than me, a bloke I'd known quite a while before, slightly, and he might have been 7 or 8 years younger than me, and a clerical fellow. So that's all there was, plus a couple of jobs out in the field, and we had to go out and get some more work because the division was short of work.
I didn't realise that. Okay.
And
Warren Bullock was the head of the division, basically.
Yes, he was. Yeah. And so I started then in 1968, and when I went there, Callum McLean, the managing director, who was a man of few words but a very able fellow and of great integrity, very good fellow, he said to me, oh, well, we're pleased to see you back, and well, we must have I think this is before that's when I came in to say, well, yes, I'll take the job. He said, well, it'd be important that you stay I have an understanding that you stay a reasonable time, because I'd only been there a year previous.
Yeah.
So I felt when I finally left them in 1994, that I'd stayed there a reasonable time and I'd kept faith with Callum McLean. We then built a whole lot of quite interesting civil engineering structures. We did this. Downers had a bit.
Sorry, and this is Warren. Sorry, just to clarify, this is Warren Bullock. And what division was this?
Civil engineering.
Okay, yeah, right. Sorry, yep.
And
it was quite small. Obviously, it grew substantially from there.
yes, well, one thing that Downers did when they got a very large project, they would set it aside as a separate project without a divisional manager looking after it.
Right.
And there was a very large tunnelling job that they had going then up at Tukanu, which is up in Turangi and Lake Taupo, with a very large tunnel, about 6 miles, which is about 10 kilometres, a very large tunnel for the hydro works there. And they had Alex Swainson, who was a very senior person in the company, who had previously been divisional manager. He was the project manager. Okay. And they were doing it in joint venture with about 3 or 4 overseas companies. You usually did these joint ventures not because, let me say that nearly all the people on the job were New Zealanders, all from Downers, nearly all their tunnelling resources were devoted to this job because they work shifts, they have 3 shifts of 8 hours, they work round the clock. Each shift has a tunnelling foreman, you have a tunnelling superintendent, you have a special mechanical superintendent who can maintain all this tunnelling equipment. You have tunnel engineers and surveyors, and so they had the cream of Downers tunnellers who followed them from job to job. So they had the cream of the tunnelling crew there, so that not as though they didn't have work on, but it wasn't under what we were doing. So time went by. We got a job. We had a couple of jobs on a bridge at Hamilton for the railways, where we were to build the piers under an existing track already, and then build the railway bridge deck to one side, and have rails laid down and build it on bogies, so that which were on the rails. And the idea was that one weekend they didn't take any trains over the weekend. We dug out whatever dirt was there under the rails, and then slid our deck across where the rails had been, and sat it on the piers which we had built under the track, and then laid rails back on our deck and run the trains. And strangely enough, it worked. Not that we did the engineering for it; somebody else the designers had designed it. We had to make it go, and that was one of the jobs. And then subsequently, we tended to get the more difficult jobs. Then a lot of civil engineering work, sort of medium-sized, smallish bridge, for instance, up in the King Country or near Napier, will be done often by a contractor who does that sort of work, a one-man contractor. I wouldn't say one man, just one man heading it up with 6 or 7 key people working for him, and they go around and they do all that sort of work. So it's got to be something special that they feel uneasy with for you to be able to win the work from them.
Okay.
So that's why we got the job in Hamilton, because one of the things you had to do was build it off the thing and roll it across. And so we got a series of jobs. We got there was quite a difficult job in the Wairarapa soon afterwards, into putting in a lake control dam, and that was on some quite reasonably difficult ground if you didn't know how to do it. If you knew how to do it, it wasn't difficult. And then there was building a bridge which is in Timaru, across to the port, a sort of on an arc. It was part of a circle where you spiral down to get from a high level down to get to the port. So it was on a curve, and it was quite a sophisticated engineering design, and that I think scared off some of the locals, so we managed to get that job. The sewage treatment works at Rotorua, which are built right down on the foreshore. That's where sewage treatment works get built, because that's where you like sewage to go where it flows by gravity, so it's the lowest point in the town.
Okay.
You build a sewage treatment.
Makes sense.
And it was just on the lakes, at the shore of the lake, and Rotorua being what it is, about I don't know, 5 metres down in the mud and so on, there was a layer of some hard sand or whatever, I forget now, and then below that there was it was thermal, so there was steam and hot water and so on and so forth. So anyway, we got the job building the Rotorua sewage treatment plant. We got the job building a bridge in Auckland at Simon Street, where it wasn't quite the same as the railway bridge at Waikato, but we had to build the bridge in half of Simon Street, block off half of Simon Street and dig a hole in the road and drill down to form the piers way down below us, and then build the bridge on it, and then swap and do the other side, and then come in afterwards. So they came in after the Ministry. We've got an excavating company to come in and dig out all around the piers we had drilled down and built, and then you had a motorway going under our bridge.
Okay. So the ice test, you put the piers, you built the bridge and then excavated underneath to...
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is what happened to the railway bridge too at Waikato.
Yes.
Where we once the rail was across our bridge and our piers were down, we then dug them all out, and the road went underneath the rail in our piers. So it's just a matter of sequencing it right, you know. And then the other, now these all took place over a period of about 4 or 5 years. And one of them was the section of motorway in Wellington between Thorndon Quay and through to just past the correspondence school, where the correspondence school is.
Yeah. That includes the terrace tunnel?
No.
It was a later stage.
Yes. So it was just in Thorndon.
Right.
Molesworth Street, Hobson Street, and the Hobson Street bridge had been built, and we had to build a couple of bridges, and then build a section of the motorway and all the retaining walls. So I went on to that full time soon after. I'm going back in time now, soon after going into the civil engineering division, and I spent about 9 months on that full time. And that's where I met Ian Mills, who you may know, or Peter Fell, you may know, and Trevor McKee, and one or two other engineers, because we all worked together on this job. So those were the sort of works we did, and once again we got that because one single contractor, smallish contractor, wouldn't want to do 2 bridges plus build all the motorway plus build all the walls and so on. So we managed to get that job, and
who was your main opposition in those days? Would have been Fletcher?
a firm called Wilkinson Davies, and then later on a firm called McConnell Dowell, and in the bigger works, yeah. And as I say, the main opposition was in a lot of cases, from the local, smaller, medium-sized contractor who was very good at his job. But anyway, we did
They
that.
had lower overheads and lower costs, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And anyway, coming back though, of course, 1968, when I was in the civil engineering division, and we went in there in January. Uh, the house we'd been in had belonged to the battery people who I'd been working for, and they wanted to put one of their own people in after a while, and so we had to find a house.
So they actually own the house, the battery people?
I'm sorry, no, they had a lease on it.
Right.
And so we looked around, and Mum was about 8 months pregnant or something, 7 months when we first started to look. And suffice to say is that we ended up buying 69 Seaview Road.
Okay.
And I think that was...
This is in Parramatta, Wellington, which is where I spent the bulk of my growing up.
That's right, indeed.
And all us kids did.
Yeah, that's right. And we moved in there one Easter in '68, and Jenny was born a week later.
Good timing.
Yeah, yes it was. Jenny was running, I think, 2 weeks late. But anyway, we did that. And
When Jenny was born, did you, I remember you telling me, I think you just dropped Mum off at the hospital and said goodbye, and then we'll give us a call. We'll give you a call in the morning. None of us going to the operating theatre.
no, well, in those days, men didn't go in and keep their wives company during the birth at all, so I took Mum to Hutt Hospital where she was booked in, and they gave me a cup of tea. I was asked if I'd like a cup of tea, and thank you very much. And then Mum, I think it was just to get me out of the way, really, when I look back. I imagine that's what they did. And they went and got Mum whatever on the way, or the room, or I don't know what. And then they said, oh, well, we'll let you know. There's no need to stay. And so I went home, and well, of course, you and Lindley, you were both still there.
And and that was a similar sort of thing for me and Lynn when we were born. Just they would let you know. There was a similar sort of format.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's so different these days, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. There was no suggestion one way or the other, and it just shows what New Zealand was like under, once again, the socialist idea of things. We just moved into the house, but they said to us, I mean, there was a telephone in the house. The people who had been there before us had been connected up. We came in, and we'd had a telephone in Lower Hutt, and we said, righto, we'd like our telephone, please, and pronto, because Judy's pregnant, expecting any day now, and but they had a bureaucratic rule that there was 2 weeks before you could before you connected.
Yes.
Whether it was set up at one time saying they would always try to do it within 2 weeks, or 2 weeks was the maximum, but it turned out to be 2 weeks was the minimum. That was it. I was in touch with them several times, but I just couldn't shift them. It was a bureaucratic nonsense. That's what you get when you get government departments running things like that. And well, there was that tendency, unfortunately. So when it came to you taking him to hospital, fortunately, Mary, my sister, and her boyfriend Don called in to see us that night, and we hadn't, and so they stayed and looked after you and Lindley while I took Mum over to the hut. But I couldn't ring up to find out how things were going, so about 6:30 in the morning, you and Lindley and I walked down to the end of the road at Parramatta, Seaview Road. There used to be a phone box there then.
That's right.
Down to that phone box and rang up and found out that Jenny had been born.
Incredible.
So I don't know how I did it. I don't know quite what happened then, where I dropped you or who looked after you, but I was able to then go and see Mum later in the morning. So, yeah. It was, by the way, it was about that time, it was just before that Easter, April 15th, as I remember. There was a major, major storm in Wellington. The 150.
That's just after Jenny was born?
No, about
Just before.
2 weeks before. And major storm and winds up to, let's say, 140 kilometres an hour, that sort of thing. And the Wahine, the ship that was the regular ferry service between Wellington and Christchurch, Littleton, it was trying to come into port, and I suppose the waves were travelling at, it was travelling at, let's say, 22 knots, and probably the waves were travelling at 30 knots. Well, that means if you can't go faster than the waves, you can't keep control. Whatever, it ran aground in the rocks, and there were all parts of Wellington all got terribly wet, and the house we were in Lower Hutt was a tiled roof, and the rain had been so strong and the wind so strong it had blown up, and it was raining in half the house. So fortunately, although Mum was very pregnant, nothing happened. She took you and Lindley to tucked up in bed, which was the half of the house that wasn't raining in, through the tiles, and got through the day.
What happened to the Waihi wreck? Did it sink the boat, or did it just turn over?
Well, it didn't sink, but it was there, and they cut it up, as I remember. Or did they patch it up and just make it a hulk?
Quite a few people died, didn't they?
Yeah, but as for what happened, I think they might have patched it up and towed it away for scrap.
Right.
They might have cut it up completely and removed it. I can't remember. There'd been another one that got on the ground in Wellington called the Wanganella.
Okay.
This would be 15 years before that, say, and they had refloated that.
Okay.
But yes, there were always a number of people died. They got swept ashore because of southerly, and it swept in and swept them over to the eastbourne shore, which unfortunately very rocky, and so some of them were dashed to their death on the rocks.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
All right. That was. Is that actually all right, because Eastbourne there's a coastline there, but there's sort of beaches there.
Oh well.
But there's just further along. There's some big rocks in there.
If you get to east, if you're going out of the harbour, Eastbourne has got a sandy beach, and then end of Eastbourne the rocks start. So
Yeah.
there's probably 2 or 3 miles of 3 or 4 kilometres of rocky coastline, with the odd little bit of a beach where you might be lucky enough to come ashore.
Most people with life jackets, didn't they?
Well, some of them would have. Yeah, I guess most of them would have. Yeah. So, anyway, that's we moved into Seaview Road, and after having, I think, counting backwards amongst all these various houses I've mentioned, if I include them all, we had 11 shifts, and we haven't shifted from there at all, except on the one occasion I mentioned to you that we got jobs all over the place, and I told you about this this job in Auckland at Simon Street where we built the bridge and then dug out under it. We also got 3 other jobs in Auckland. We built the large underground car park in Aotea Square.
Okay. Is that the one you say is Downer's gift to Auckland?
Yes. Or Downer's gift to Auckland City, yeah.
Because you...
We did our dough on it, yeah. we were taken to the Clevedons by the unions, basically. You know, they'd go on strike, this, that and the other thing. Terrible. But we had that. We built a Navy facility for the Navy over at Devonport Naval Base, which was reasonably, which was bits and pieces. There was that they wanted a big floating pontoon, like a big floating box, where they were getting a whole lot of getting 4 patrol boats, each about 100 feet long, which they didn't last that long in the Navy because they were too damn small for New Zealand's ocean-going work. But they got 4 of these patrol craft. We built 3 things for them. We built a ship lift, which is 4 piles built out in the deeper water, and then a bridge to those 4 piles, and then a platform, and then winches on the top of the 4 piles, which lifted a large platform up and would actually lift them out of water, so they're sitting on the boat, sitting on the platform.
Okay.
And then to the point where it matches in, and the platform's got rails in it. It matches into the rails on the bridge, which approach, and then you can wheel them ashore onto a hard standing.
These 100-footers, they'll do that to these 100-footers?
Yes, yeah. They're very. I must still be there, the ship lift, and we built an engine test station for them, which was a matter of a building with a test equipment in it for their engines, and that would I don't know much about that. We would have been they would have had a specification for engine testing facilities, which we would have got a mechanical subcontractor to install. And another thing, they also wanted somewhere for these things. Basically, they wanted somewhere for it to moor, and a base for it. And they got this by having us build about 100 foot long, slightly about the same length as the boats themselves, 100 by about 20 feet. That's about 30 metres by 6 metres, and about 4 metres deep, concrete box, a pontoon made out of concrete. Inside this box was stores, facilities and so on for them. On top of the box was just a deck, basically. The thing floated there with a certain amount of freeboard and some mooring pontoons, and it was then moored with buffers to the side of the existing wharf. So there was this pontoon sticking out from the existing wharf, and these 2 each side could moor. In fact, one of the engineers, Ed Perry, who you wouldn't know, and who a contemporary of mine, who worked on the Opera House here, he was a very able fellow, and he designed these, a very thin concrete, reinforced concrete box, and you've got to have the concrete exactly right in terms of thickness and so on and so forth, to make sure you get the freeboard. If you've got too thick walls, the thing will fight and float at all. So you've got to get it floating with just the freeboard you want, and just a little bit more concrete to make all the difference. So anyway, suffice to say, this went very well. We built the concrete, this concrete pontoon. We built it on the other side of the harbour, in a dry dock area, and towed it across and moored it. Then the framework for this ship lift, that was built over near the entrance to the Auckland Harbour Bridge by another steelwork company who built ships, and they floated it across on barges and put it into place. Anyway, I'm going on about that.
No, that's all right. Sorry, no, that's interesting.
Then
The Navy was pleased with the work?
yeah, I think yes, they
well,
were. Yeah.
I suppose judged by the fact they kept on giving you work, they probably were.
Well, no, they didn't keep on. We just got, this was all one.
Oh, one contract.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, Cable Price Corporation, we are part of the Cable Price Downer Group, got the contract for the boats,
Right.
and they had to put in with their offer not only the boats but the whole facility. So, because we were the construction company allied to the agents for the boats, that we got the job. I think we probably had quite a good bid anyway. Then another job we got in the upper reaches of Auckland, you may not know it, there's between Hobsonville, the Hobsonville Air Base, which is right up the top of Auckland Harbour, and and the North Shore at that point, the name will escape me for the moment, we built quite a difficult bridge across the harbour there.
Okay.
That was a very large bridge. That was a major job which Ian Mills managed brilliantly.
And so that crosses the harbour, because the Auckland Harbour Bridge crosses the harbour.
Yes.
This is another bridge, which is how long will it be?
About the other bridge is about 2 miles up,
Okay.
and it's I suppose it's got about 8 spans, and each span would be 60 metres or something.
Okay, not quite big.
Oh, it's quite a big
I'm
bridge.
not sure if I've been on it, but
No.
okay.
Well, you've been to the site because you would have been with me. Because what happened was that here we were in Wellington, and we found out we ended up with this bridge in Auckland at Simon Street. We had the underground car park in Aotea Square. We had the naval facility for the patrol boats in Devonport, and we had this bridge up at Hobsonville, and of course the Rotorua sewage treatment plant. So we had all these jobs, and Alex Sainson came to me one time about I think in July or August, and said, I think with all these jobs, really you should go on up there. Warren Bullock, in fact, had gone at this stage. He came to work for an Australian contractor. So I was looking after the civil engineering structures work.
Okay, what was your title there?
Manager Civil Engineering Structures.
Okay.
He said, so I went up there.
Yep.
And the family followed in December.
Okay.
And we lived at Rothsay Bay, which is on the North Shore. It's north of Takapuna and just north of Mairangi Bay. And we rented a house there, and a lovely house with a view right out over the sea to Rangitoto. We could walk down the road to the beach. And in fact, on a Saturday, quite often I'd go out and jobs would be working, and I'd go out to jobs, and I'd come back about midday. Mum would be down on the beach with you 3 kids having a picnic lunch.
Yes, okay. Yeah, no, I remember it was. Maybe it was over. So what time of the year were we there? It was obviously summer. But
Yes, it was. It was December through till Easter. We were there, and
I remember going to the naval base with you.
Yes, and you would have gone to the Upper Harbour Bridge too. You probably don't remember.
No,
Yes,
it's not as exciting as the naval base, obviously, in a 7-year-old's mind, or however old I was at this
Yeah,
stage.
indeed, yeah. And then we then Downers restructured the organisation. Instead of having all the earthworks in New Zealand being run out of head office in the earthworks division, or the civil engineering structures likewise run out of an office, and they decided to regionalise with a regional manager in Auckland, Wellington and the South Island, who would have all these various jobs, types of work. And in this arrangement, they asked me if I would be chief engineer, and I said, I'm not much of a construction engineer. I know my own abilities and so on. They said, you've got plenty of good engineers. It's just you would have to coordinate and work to make sure they did the things that was wanted when they're wanted, and know enough about it to be able to do it sensibly. I think those last few words are mine, but that's what it all meant. And so in Easter we came back, and Jenny was 5. And so we came back, and when we got home we found the power wasn't on. Once again, the power boards were run by effectively civil servants, so we couldn't get the power on that day, against the rules. So we stayed in a motel at Plympton. And you and Lindley went back to Parramatta School.
That's right, I remember coming back.
Yeah. And,
I had a lot of mates in my street who I missed.
yeah, and that's right. And as we came back, you got out of your car, and there were Robbie and
Harvey or whoever.
Harvey, yeah. And you said, "I'm never leaving Parramatta again." You sort of got out of the car, and there they were, running around, saying good day to you, coming to see us. So yes, that's what we found in Rothsay Bay. There were, once again, they were an older group in the area. And it was a lovely place to live. There weren't many kids for you and Lindley to play. Actually, Lindley wasn't bad, but for you and Jenny, don't know if you remember that.
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah. And I think I've told you before, Rothsay Bay was the place where you learnt to ride a bike. You had the 20-inch.
That's right. And we had a long driveway, didn't we?
You had a long driveway, but it was too long and steep with no run up at the other end to get you down there. So there was a path around the house where you could, if you took off from one side of the house, you could come down and past the garage and then back up again. So that's where you learnt to ride your 20-inch
Yes,
bike.
that's right.
And I don't know if you know that when you left, Mum went to tell them at Rothsay Bay School, that you were leaving. And the teacher said, "Oh, we always lose the good ones."
Oh, obviously just been nice.
Oh well, didn't have to say it.
Actually, Dad, our tape's probably just about to run out. And in fact, we've got, it's about to run out, so we'll stop now.
Right.
In fact, it's not what's topping. I have to press this one.